Hello there, and welcome back to Whispered Knowledge. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Maybe you've had a long day filled with noise and motion, or perhaps you're the kind of person who likes drifting off to the sound of quiet wonder rather than silence. Either way, this evening's journey is designed just for you. You have nothing to do but rest. Let your shoulders drop, your breathing deepen, and your mind open gently to the natural world that surrounds us all. Tonight, we're stepping into the greatest story ever told. One that's been unfolding for billions of years across every corner of our planet. We're exploring nature itself, from the tallest trees to the deepest ocean trenches, from the smallest microbes in a handful of soil to the magnificent storms that light up our skies. We'll discover how forests breathe and communicate, how creatures thrive in crushing darkness, and how the tiniest insect can shape entire ecosystems. Some of these facts might surprise you, others might fill you with quiet awe, and all of them together paint a picture of a world far more connected and alive than we often realize. And before we begin our gentle descent into these natural wonders, if these calm explorations help you unwind or give you a peaceful way to end your day, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps others discover this space too, one curious mind at a time. Now, let your eyes grow heavy, your thoughts slow down, and let's begin our journey through 100 remarkable facts about the natural world. The living forest. Beneath your feet, if you were standing in a forest right now, an entire universe would be pulsing with life. Trees, those silent giants that seem so still and separate, are actually engaged in constant conversation. Scientists have discovered what they now call the Wood Wide Web, an underground network of fungal threads that connects trees at their roots. These fungal filaments, thinner than the finest thread, weave through the soil, creating a communication system that spans entire forests. Through this network, trees can send chemical signals to one another, warning of insect attacks or drought conditions approaching. When one tree is infested with caterpillars, it releases distress signals through the fungal network, and neighboring trees respond by flooding their leaves with defensive chemicals that make them unpalatable to the insects. This isn't just passive chemical transmission. Mother trees, the oldest and largest in the forest, have been observed actively nurturing their offspring through this underground web. They send excess sugars produced through photosynthesis to younger trees struggling in the shade, essentially feeding their children through soil and fungus. Even trees of different species share resources this way, creating a cooperative community rather than the competitive wilderness we once imagined. The fungus benefits too, receiving sugars from the trees in exchange for providing minerals and water that its far-reaching threads can access. It's a relationship that evolved over hundreds of millions of years, so ancient and fundamental that neither trees nor fungus could thrive without it. Forests don't just communicate, they create weather. Through a process scientists call the biotic pump theory, forests actually generate rain. Trees draw water from deep in the soil through their root systems, pulling it up through their trunks and into their leaves. There, through tiny pores called stomata, They release this water vapor into the atmosphere through a process called transpiration. A single large oak tree can transpire over 100 gallons of water on a hot summer day. When you multiply this by the millions of trees in a forest, the amount of water vapor released is staggering. This moisture rises, cools, and condenses into clouds that return as rainfall, creating a self-sustaining water cycle. The Amazon rainforest is so efficient at this process that it generates much of its own rainfall, recycling moisture that keeps the entire ecosystem hydrated. This is why deforestation has such dramatic effects. When you remove the trees, you break this cycle, and the rains begin to fail. Some trees growing today were already ancient when human civilization began. The oldest individual tree is a bristlecone pine in California's White Mountains, confirmed to be over 4,800 years old. This tree was already 1,000 years old when the pyramids were being built in Egypt. But even more remarkable are clonal colonies, where genetically identical trees share a single root system that sends up new trunks over millennia. In Utah, there's an aspen grove called Pando that consists of over 40,000 individual tree trunks, all connected by one massive root system. Scientists estimate this organism weighs over 6 million kilograms and, based on the landscape it inhabits, could be anywhere from 8,000 to 80,000 years old, though its true age remains impossible to determine precisely. What we do know is that it's among the oldest and heaviest living things on Earth. These ancient beings have survived ice ages, droughts, fires, and countless other challenges through their remarkable ability to endure and adapt. The forest floor, often overlooked in our admiration for towering canopies, is one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. In a single teaspoon of forest soil, there are more microorganisms than there are people on Earth. Billions of bacteria, along with archaea, fungi, protists, and microscopic animals, all work together to break down dead material and recycle nutrients. This invisible workforce transforms fallen leaves, dead wood, and animal waste into rich humus that feeds the forest. Without these decomposers, dead material would simply pile up, locking away nutrients that plants need to grow. The soil itself is alive, breathing, exchanging gases with the atmosphere through tiny air pockets between soil particles. When you walk through a forest and smell that rich, earthy scent, you're actually smelling the metabolic byproducts of billions of living organisms working beneath your feet. Forests store vast amounts of carbon, acting as one of Earth's most important defenses against climate change. Trees absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere during photosynthesis, using the carbon to build their trunks, branches, and roots. Forests currently store about 80% of all terrestrial biodiversity, while absorbing approximately 2.6 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year. When forests are destroyed, this stored carbon is released back into the atmosphere, contributing to global warming. But when forests are protected and restored, they become powerful allies in stabilizing our climate. A single mature tree can absorb about 22 kilograms of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere each year, while producing enough oxygen for 2 people to breathe. Forests don't just exist alongside human civilization. They make it possible. The diversity of life within forests staggers the imagination. Tropical rainforests, covering less than 6% of Earth's land surface, contain more than half of the world's plant and animal species. In one study of a Panamanian rainforest, scientists found over 1,200 different tree species in just 50 hectares of land. More tree diversity than exists in all of North America. This incredible variety creates niches for countless other organisms. Each layer of the forest, from the dark forest floor to the sun-drenched canopy, hosts its own community of specialized creatures. Some frogs spend their entire lives in the tiny pools of water that collect in plants high in the canopy, never touching the ground. Insects have evolved to look exactly like leaves, bark, or even bird droppings to avoid predators. This complexity arose over millions of years as species evolved in relationship with one another, creating interconnections so intricate that we're still discovering new ones. Count ocean depths and marine mysteries. Beneath the waves lies a world more alien than anything we might imagine on distant planets. The ocean covers over 70% of Earth's surface, yet we've explored less than 10% of it. The deep sea, beginning where sunlight fades to nothing around 200 meters down, is a realm of perpetual darkness, crushing pressure, and near freezing temperatures. Yet life thrives there in forms that challenge everything we thought we knew about survival. These creatures have adapted to conditions that would instantly kill most surface-dwelling organisms, evolving bizarre features that seem pulled from science fiction, but are simply elegant solutions to extreme challenges. The pressure in the deep ocean is immense. At the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the deepest point in Earth's oceans, at nearly 11,000 meters, the pressure reaches over 1,000 times what we experience at sea level. To put this in perspective, imagine the weight of 50 jumbo jets pressing down on your body from every direction simultaneously. Yet creatures live even here. Fish, crustaceans, and other organisms have evolved soft, gelatinous bodies with minimal skeletal structure and no air-filled spaces that would collapse under such pressure. Their cells contain special molecules that prevent proteins from being crushed, allowing life to persist in what seems like an impossible environment. Scientists discovered amphipods, small, shrimp-like creatures thriving at the deepest point ever surveyed, proving that life finds a way even in Earth's most extreme places. In the twilight zone of the ocean, between 200 and 1,000 meters deep, lives a phenomenon so widespread that it transforms our understanding of marine life: bioluminescence. Here, where the last traces of sunlight fade to complete darkness, an estimated 90% of organisms produce their own light. They do this through chemical reactions, typically involving a molecule called luciferin that, when combined with oxygen and an enzyme called luciferase, produces light with almost no heat. Fish use glowing lures to attract prey, drawing smaller fish toward their jaws with dangling lights. The anglerfish is perhaps the most famous example, with a bioluminescent bulb extending from its forehead like a fishing rod. But countless other species have evolved their own lighting systems. Some squid, shoot clouds of glowing particles to confuse predators, creating underwater fireworks as they escape. Others, like the cookie-cutter shark, have light-producing organs on their bellies that help them blend with the dim light filtering down from above, making them invisible to prey swimming below. The deep sea is not a desert, but a surprisingly productive ecosystem sustained by a steady rain of nutrients from above. This marine snow, as scientists call it, consists of dead organisms, fecal matter, and bits of organic material that slowly drift down from the sunlit surface waters. For deep-sea creatures, this is their primary food source, and they've evolved remarkable patience to survive on it. Many deep-sea fish have enormous mouths and expandable stomachs, allowing them to eat prey much larger than themselves when the rare opportunity arises. The gulper eel can unhinge its jaw to swallow fish many times its own size, while the pelican eel's mouth is nearly a quarter of its body length. These adaptations make sense in an environment where your next meal might not arrive for weeks or months. Energy conservation is crucial. So many deep-sea creatures move slowly, have low metabolic rates, and spend most of their time waiting in the darkness. Some of the strangest creatures on Earth live in the ocean's midnight zone, between 1,000 and 4,000 meters deep. The fangtooth fish, despite being only about 18 centimeters long, has teeth so large they are proportionally the biggest of any fish in the ocean. When its mouth closes, special sockets on either side of its brain allow the enormous fangs to fit without piercing its own head. The barrel-eye fish has a transparent dome on its head, through which you can see its tubular eyes pointing upward, always watching for prey silhouetted against the faint light above. Giant isopods, relatives of the pillbugs you might find in your garden, grow to the size of footballs down here, an example of deep-sea gigantism, a phenomenon where species that are small at the surface grow much larger in the deep. Scientists aren't entirely sure why this happens, but theories include lower metabolic rates, longer lifespans, and reduced predation pressure in the deep ocean. The discovery of hydrothermal vents in the late 1970s revolutionized our understanding of where life could exist. These underwater geysers occur where tectonic plates are pulling apart, allowing seawater to seep down into Earth's crust, get superheated by magma, and shoot back up, carrying dissolved minerals. The water can reach temperatures over 400 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt lead. Yet it doesn't boil because of the immense pressure. Around these vents, entire ecosystems thrive in complete darkness, with no energy from the sun. Instead, specialized bacteria use chemosynthesis, converting the chemicals in the vent water, particularly hydrogen sulfide, into energy. These bacteria form the base of a food chain that includes giant tube worms that can grow up to 2 meters long, enormous clams, white crabs, and many species found nowhere else on Earth. Before this discovery, scientists believed all life on Earth ultimately depended on photosynthesis from the sun. Hydrothermal vents proved that life could exist independently of sunlight, a finding that expanded our understanding of where life might exist elsewhere in the universe. Coral reefs, sometimes called the rainforests of the sea, support an extraordinary abundance of life despite covering less than 1% of the ocean floor. A single reef can host thousands of fish species, along with countless invertebrates, algae, and microorganisms. Corals themselves are animals, tiny polyps related to jellyfish that build limestone skeletons beneath themselves. Over thousands of years, these skeletons accumulate into massive reef structures. But corals can't do this alone. They have a symbiotic relationship with zooxanthellae, microscopic algae that live inside their tissues. The algae perform photosynthesis, providing the coral with sugars, while the coral provides the algae with a protected place to live and access to sunlight. This partnership is so important that corals can't survive without it, which is why rising ocean temperatures are so devastating. When water gets too warm, corals expel their algae in a process called bleaching, leaving the white skeleton visible through transparent tissue. If conditions don't improve quickly, the coral starves and dies. The ocean's largest residents are also among its most mysterious. Blue whales, the largest animals ever to exist on Earth, can grow over 30 meters long and weigh up to 200 tons. That's equivalent to about 30 elephants. Their tongue alone can weigh as much as an elephant, and their heart is the size of a small car. Despite their enormous size, blue whales eat some of the ocean's smallest creatures, filtering vast quantities of tiny shrimp-like krill through baleen plates in their mouths. A single blue whale can consume up to 4 tons of krill per day during feeding season. Yet we know surprisingly little about their lives. Blue whales undertake long migrations between feeding grounds in cold polar waters and breeding areas in warmer seas. But exactly where they go, how they navigate, and how they find one another across vast ocean distances remains partially mysterious. They communicate through low-frequency calls that can travel hundreds of kilometers underwater, creating songs that last for hours and contain patterns we're only beginning to understand. In the ocean's food chains, everything is connected in ways both beautiful and brutal. The bristlemouth fish, a small creature most people have never heard of, may be the most numerous vertebrate on Earth, with population estimates in the quadrillions. These fish form massive schools in the ocean's twilight zone, rising toward the surface at night to feed and descending during the day to avoid predators. This daily vertical migration, undertaken by countless marine species, is considered the largest animal migration on the planet, not in distance traveled, but in sheer biomass, moving up and down through the water column every day. The bristlemouths and other small fish feed on zooplankton, which feed on phytoplankton, which use photosynthesis to capture the sun's energy. Larger fish eat the bristlemouths. Those fish are eaten by larger predators, and eventually, when these animals die, they sink as marine snow to feed the deep-sea communities, completing the cycle. This vast, interconnected web of life processes more carbon, generates more oxygen, and supports more biodiversity than any terrestrial ecosystem. The ocean's mesopelagic zone, between 200 and 1,000 meters deep, contains roughly 10 billion tons of fish, though estimates vary widely, and this figure remains subject to ongoing scientific debate. That's more than all the fish in the rest of the ocean combined. Yet, we've barely begun to study this region. Scientists estimate that only 1/3 of marine species have been discovered and described, and the majority of undiscovered species likely live in the deep ocean simply because it's so difficult and expensive to explore. Every deep-sea expedition discovers new species, sometimes dozens of them. In 2020, scientists exploring a seamount near Australia found over 30 new species in a single location, including blind eels, carnivorous sponges, and bizarre crustaceans. The deep ocean is Earth's largest habitat, comprising over 90% of the volume available for life, yet it remains more mysterious than the surface of Mars. Among the strangest deep-sea adaptations is gigantism in some species and extreme dwarfism in others. The giant squid, immortalized in sailors' tales as the kraken, can grow to over 13 meters in length, including its tentacles. Its eyes, the largest of any animal, can be as big as dinner plates, evolved to capture what little light penetrates to the depths where it lives. Even larger is the colossal squid, which has shorter tentacles but a much more massive body, with specimens weighing up to 700 kilograms. These giants feed on deep-sea fish and smaller squid, and they in turn are hunted by sperm whales, which dive over a kilometer deep and can hold their breath for over an hour to catch them. The battles between sperm whales and giant squid occur in complete darkness at crushing pressures, and we've never witnessed one. We only know they happen because dead whales sometimes surface bearing circular scars from squid suckers. The deep sea also contains some of nature's most remarkable examples of sexual dimorphism, differences between males and females of the same species. In several anglerfish species, the tiny males, sometimes less than a centimeter long, are vastly smaller than the females, which can be 30 centimeters or more. When a male encounters a female in the vast darkness, he bites into her body and never lets go. Over time, he fuses with her, his body deteriorating until he's essentially a growth on her side, providing sperm whenever she's ready to spawn. His circulatory system connects to hers, and he becomes entirely dependent on her for nutrition. A single female may have multiple males fused to her body. This bizarre reproductive strategy evolved because finding a mate in the enormous dark ocean is extremely difficult. By fusing permanently, the male ensures his genes will be passed on without having to find a female again. Animal kingdoms. The animal world displays intelligence and consciousness in forms we're only beginning to appreciate. Dolphins, those graceful marine mammals, have demonstrated abilities that challenge our understanding of non-human minds. Each dolphin develops a unique signature whistle early in life, essentially giving itself a name. When researchers played recordings of different dolphin whistles to individuals, the dolphins only responded by repeating their own whistle back when they heard their specific signature call. This suggests they have a sense of individual identity, recognizing themselves as distinct beings. Scientists have also documented what appears to be empathy in dolphins. Multiple times throughout history, dolphins have been observed protecting humans from shark attacks, forming protective circles around swimmers and using their bodies as shields. In one case, off the coast of New Zealand, a pod of dolphins surrounded a group of swimmers and began herding them together, slapping the water with their tails. The swimmers soon realized a great white shark was circling nearby. The dolphins maintained their protective formation until the shark left, then swam away. Whether this is truly empathy, instinct, or something else entirely, it demonstrates a level of awareness and decision-making that's remarkable. Birds, those creatures that fill our skies and trees with color and song, carry in their very bones a connection to Earth's distant past. Every bird alive today is, taxonomically speaking, a dinosaur. The connection isn't metaphorical. Birds are direct descendants of theropod dinosaurs, the same group that included Tyrannosaurus rex and Velociraptor. Over millions of years, some of these dinosaurs evolved feathers, not initially for flight, but probably for insulation and display. Gradually, as natural selection favored individuals who could glide and eventually fly, these feathered dinosaurs became the birds we know today. The evolution wasn't a simple linear progression, but a complex branching tree where different lineages experimented with different approaches to flight and lifestyle. When we watch a robin hopping across a lawn or hear an owl calling in the night, we're witnessing living dinosaurs, the only lineage that survived the mass extinction event 60 million years ago. Their beaks are modified dinosaur snouts, their hollow bones an adaptation that made flight possible, and their behaviors, from complex nesting to sophisticated vocalizations, are continuations of patterns that stretch back to the Mesozoic era. The intelligence of crows and their corvid relatives has astonished researchers studying animal cognition. New Caledonian crows craft sophisticated tools from twigs and leaves, bending hooks into specific shapes to extract insects from tree bark. In laboratory experiments, crows have demonstrated the ability to solve multi-step puzzles, understanding cause and effect relationships, and even planning several moves ahead. One famous experiment showed crows dropping stones into water-filled tubes to raise the water level and bring floating food within reach, demonstrating understanding of water displacement that human children don't grasp until age 5 or 7. Even more remarkable is their ability to remember human faces. In one study, researchers wearing specific masks captured and banded wild crows. Years later, when people wore those same masks near the crow's territory, the birds would scold and dive bomb them aggressively, despite having been captured only once. Crows that were never caught themselves, but had seen the dangerous person, also learned to avoid them, suggesting cultural transmission of information within crow communities. Elephants possess emotional complexity that mirrors our own in surprising ways. They live in matriarchal societies led by the oldest female, whose decades of accumulated knowledge about water sources, migration routes, and social relationships guides the entire herd. When an elephant dies, family members often stay with the body for days, gently touching it with their trunks, and sometimes covering it with branches and dirt in what appears to be a burial ritual. Elephants have been observed visiting the bones of deceased relatives years later, carefully examining and handling the remains, particularly the skull and tusks. This suggests they remember specific individuals and perhaps grieve their loss. The emotional intelligence of elephants extends to empathy for others. When a herd member is injured or distressed, others rush to help, using their trunks to lift fallen individuals and vocalizing what appear to be calming sounds. There are documented cases of elephants protecting other species as well, including using their bodies to shield smaller animals from predators. These behaviors suggest a rich inner life and emotional awareness that we're only beginning to understand. Migration patterns in the animal kingdom reveal navigational abilities that seem almost impossible. Arctic terns hold the record for the longest migration, traveling from Arctic breeding grounds to Antarctic feeding areas and back again each year. A round trip of over 70,000 kilometers. Over their lifetime, which can span 30 years, an individual tern may fly a distance equivalent to 3 trips to the moon and back. How they navigate such journeys remains partially mysterious, but researchers have discovered that many migratory animals use multiple overlapping systems. Some birds can sense Earth's magnetic field through specialized cells in their beaks containing magnetic crystals, essentially giving them a biological compass. Others navigate by the stars, learning constellations as juveniles and using them as guides. Day-flying birds use the sun's position, compensating for its movement across the sky. Salmon return to the exact stream where they were born, possibly by remembering the unique chemical signature of their home waters. Monarch butterflies migrate thousands of kilometers from North America to specific groves in Mexico, a journey that takes multiple generations, meaning the butterflies that complete the journey have never been there before, yet somehow know the way. The communication systems animals use range from simple to astonishingly complex. Honeybees communicate the location of flowers through dance, performing a figure-8 pattern called the waggle dance on the vertical surface of the hive. The angle of the dance, relative to straight up, indicates the direction to the flowers relative to the sun's position, while the duration of the waggling portion conveys the distance. Essentially, bees are performing a symbolic representation of geography, translating 3-dimensional space into movement that other bees can interpret and follow to food sources they've never visited. This isn't instinct alone. Young bees learn the dance by watching experienced foragers, sometimes making mistakes until they perfect the movements. Even more surprisingly, bees can discuss quality, with more vigorous dancing indicating better flower patches, and other bees can challenge these assessments, essentially having debates about where the colony should focus its efforts. Sperm whales have been found to possess what researchers are calling a phonetic alphabet. Using machine learning to analyze thousands of whale vocalizations called coders, scientists discovered that sperm whale communication involves complex structures similar to human language. The coders vary in rhythm, tempo, and the number of clicks they contain, creating different meanings. like human language, which uses combinations of simple sounds to create words with different meanings. Sperm whales appear to combine click patterns in rule-based ways to convey information. Different whale clans have distinct dialects, variations in how they structure their calls, and these dialects are passed down through generations, representing cultural traditions that differ between populations. What exactly the whales are saying remains unknown, but the structural complexity of their communication suggests they may be sharing far more sophisticated information than simple emotional states or warnings about predators. The diversity of animal senses extends beyond our human experience in ways that fundamentally change how we understand animal perception. Many snakes can see infrared radiation, detecting the body heat of warm-blooded prey in complete darkness through specialized pit organs on their faces. These pits contain thousands of nerve endings that are exquisitely sensitive to temperature differences as small as 0.003 of a degree. A rattlesnake can detect a mouse from several feet away, based purely on its thermal signature. Mantis shrimp, despite having eyes smaller than a peppercorn, possess the most complex color vision in the animal kingdom, with 12 types of color receptors compared to our 3. They can see polarized light and likely perceive colors we can't even imagine. Sharks and rays can detect the electrical fields generated by muscle contractions in other animals using specialized organs called ampullae of Lorenzini. This sense is so acute that a shark can find a flounder buried in sand by detecting the tiny electrical signals from its breathing muscles. These different sensory worlds mean that different animals literally experience different realities, perceiving aspects of their environment that are entirely invisible to us. Some animals possess abilities that seem almost supernatural. The alpine swift can remain airborne for over 6 months without landing, based on tracking studies that monitored their movements continuously. These birds sleep, eat, and even mate on the wing. These birds fly continuously from the time they leave their nests as juveniles until they return to breed as adults, covering over 200,000 kilometers in their first year. Bar-headed geese migrate over the Himalayas, flying at altitudes where humans would quickly lose consciousness from lack of oxygen. They've evolved larger lungs, more efficient hemoglobin, and the ability to hyperventilate without getting dizzy, allowing them to breathe the thin air at 8,000 meters altitude. Arctic terns, as mentioned, migrate from pole to pole annually, meaning they experience 2 summers per year and see more daylight than any other creature. The intelligence of octopuses challenges our understanding of what intelligence looks like. With most of their neurons distributed through their 8 arms rather than centralized in their brain, octopuses seem to process information differently than vertebrates. Each arm can act semi-independently, continuing to search for food and respond to stimuli even when separated from the body. Octopuses can solve complex puzzles, navigate mazes, use tools, and even display something like playfulness, behavior that serves no obvious survival purpose. In laboratory settings, Octopuses have learned to open child-proof containers, predict which of several tubes hidden food will emerge from, and even spray water at lights to turn them off when the brightness annoys them. They can change not only their color, but also the texture of their skin to match their surroundings with incredible precision, transforming themselves into perfect replicas of coral, rock, or seaweed. This camouflage is controlled by millions of color-changing cells called chromatophores, and the transformation happens in less than a second. Perhaps most remarkable is evidence that octopuses can learn by observation. In one experiment, one octopus watched another opening a container to get food. The observing octopus, when given the same container, opened it significantly faster than octopuses that hadn't watched the demonstration. This suggests they can learn not just through trial and error, but by watching others, a cognitive ability once thought limited to mammals and birds. The fact that octopuses evolved such sophisticated intelligence independently of vertebrates through a completely different evolutionary path suggests that intelligence can arise through multiple routes and may be more common in the universe than we once thought. Plant wisdom and adaptations. Plants, often dismissed as passive organisms, possess sophisticated abilities that challenge our categories of intelligence and behavior. The Venus flytrap, one of the best-known carnivorous plants, actually counts. Its trap has tiny trigger hairs on the inner surface, and the trap will only close if two hairs are touched within about 20 seconds, or if one hair is touched twice in quick succession. This prevents the plant from wasting energy closing on raindrops or falling debris. But the sophistication doesn't end there. After the trap closes, it needs additional stimulation, more touches from a struggling insect before it seals completely and begins producing digestive enzymes. The plant is essentially verifying that it has caught something worth digesting before investing the significant energy required to produce enzymes and absorb nutrients. Recent research has shown the Venus flytrap can even count higher. If it receives 5 stimulations, it produces more digestive enzymes than if it receives just the minimum required to trigger digestion, adjusting its investment based on the likely size of its meal. Dessert plants have evolved remarkable strategies to survive in environments where water is scarce and temperatures are extreme. Cacti, the iconic desert plants, have replaced leaves with spines, reducing surface area and therefore water loss, while also providing protection from herbivores. The thick, waxy coating on their skin, called the cuticle, further prevents water from evaporating. But perhaps most impressive is their specialized form of photosynthesis called crassulacean acid metabolism, or CAM. Normal plants open their stomata, the tiny pores through which they exchange gases during the day, to take in carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. But opening these pores allows water to escape, which is disastrous in the desert. Cam plants open their stomata at night when it's cooler and water loss is minimized, storing the carbon dioxide in organic acids until the sun rises. During the day, with their pores closed, they use the stored carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. This clever temporal separation of gas exchange and photosynthesis allows them to survive in places that would kill most plants. The partnership between plants and pollinators has driven some of the most exquisite adaptations in nature. Orchids, which make up one of the largest plant families with over 25,000 species, have evolved incredibly specific relationships with their pollinators. Some orchids produce flowers that look and smell exactly like female bees, complete with ultraviolet patterns visible only to insects. Male bees attempt to mate with these fake females, and in the process, pollen sacs stick to their bodies. When the frustrated bee visits another flower, the pollen transfers. Other orchids have deep tubular flowers that can only be accessed by specific butterflies or moths with tongues long enough to reach the nectar at the bottom. This exclusivity ensures that pollen isn't wasted on insects that visit many different flower species. When Charles Darwin first examined an orchid from Madagascar with a nectar tube over 30 centimeters long, he predicted there must be a moth with a tongue long enough to pollinate it, though no such creature was known at the time. Decades later, scientists discovered the Morgan's sphinx moth, which has a tongue that can indeed reach the orchid's nectar while picking up pollen. This vindication of Darwin's prediction became a famous example of how co-evolution shapes species over millions of years. Plants have sophisticated chemical defense systems that activate when they're under attack. When a caterpillar begins eating a tomato plant's leaves, the plant detects compounds in the caterpillar's saliva and responds by producing chemicals that make the leaves taste terrible and difficult to digest. But it doesn't stop there. The plant also releases volatile organic compounds into the air, essentially calling for help. These airborne chemicals attract wasps that parasitize caterpillars, bringing in reinforcements that will attack the plant's attacker. Neighboring plants can detect these airborne warnings and preemptively activate their own defenses, even though they haven't been attacked yet. Some plants take it further. When acacia trees in Africa are being eaten by antelopes, they increase the tannin concentration in their leaves to toxic levels. They also release ethylene gas that drifts downwind, warning other acacias to prepare their defenses. Antelopes have learned this, moving perpendicular to the wind when feeding so they don't encounter the warned trees. The variety of seed dispersal strategies plants employ shows evolution's creativity. Some seeds are designed to travel by wind, equipped with wings like maple seeds that helicopter through the air, or with fluffy parachutes like dandelion seeds that can drift for kilometers. Other plants recruit animals for transport. Fruits evolved as packages of nutrition surrounding seeds, essentially bribes to animals to eat them and carry the seeds away in their digestive systems before depositing them, conveniently fertilized, far from the parent plant. Some fruits specifically attract birds with bright colors, while others target mammals with strong scents. Burdock plants produce seeds covered in tiny hooks that grab onto passing fur, hitching a ride to new locations. The coconut, protected in its hard shell, can float across oceans, colonizing distant islands. Perhaps most explosive is the dynamite tree, whose fruits literally explode when ripe, launching seeds at speeds over 60 meters per second and distances up to 90 meters. Each strategy represents millions of years of refinement, solving the fundamental problem all plants face: how to move to new locations when you're rooted in place. Some plants have adapted to collaborate with fire rather than avoid it. In ecosystems prone to wildfires, certain species have evolved to not just survive fire, but to use it as part of their reproductive strategy. Banksia and Hakea trees in Australia produce woody fruits that remain closed for years, only opening to release their seeds after the intense heat of a wildfire cracks them open. The freshly burned landscape, cleared of competitors and enriched with ash nutrients, provides ideal conditions for the seeds to germinate. Some pine species have serotinous cones that are sealed with resin. This resin only melts in the extreme heat of fire, allowing the cones to open and release seeds at the optimal time. The giant sequoia trees of California have thick, spongy bark that insulates their living tissues from fire damage. These trees can survive fires that would kill almost anything else, and in fact, sequoia forests need periodic fires to clear out competing species and prepare the soil for sequoia seedlings. Without fire, sequoia groves gradually decline, overgrown by other species. We've learned, sometimes painfully, that suppressing all fires in these ecosystems does more harm than good, disrupting cycles that have sustained these forests for millennia. Plant roots do far more than simply anchor plants and absorb water. In recent years, scientists have discovered that roots possess a sensitivity to their environment that resembles sensory perception. Root tips have been called the plant's brain, regions with the highest concentration of electrical and chemical signaling. Roots can sense and grow away from toxic substances in the soil, detect gravity to grow downward, and even respond to sound. In one remarkable experiment, researchers found that plant roots grow toward recordings of running water but ignore other sounds, suggesting they can somehow hear or sense vibrations associated with water sources. Roots also appear able to recognize their own kin. When multiple plants from the same parent are growing together, they produce less root growth than when growing near unrelated plants of the same species, essentially being less competitive with their siblings. This recognition system likely involves chemical detection of root secretions, allowing plants to identify family members underground. The oldest plants on Earth have witnessed more human history than any structure we've built. The oldest known living tree is a Great Basin bristlecone pine, nicknamed Methuselah, which has been growing in California's White Mountains for over 4,800 years. This tree was already centuries old when the ancient Egyptians were building the pyramids. It has survived countless droughts, fires, ice storms, and every climatic fluctuation of the past 5 millennia. The wood of bristlecone pines is extremely dense and resinous, making it resistant to decay, insects, and disease. Even after parts of the tree die, the remaining living bark can sustain the organism for centuries or millennia longer. Looking at a bristlecone pine, with its twisted, weathered form, you're seeing a living connection to a time before recorded history, an organism that has been growing in the same spot longer than any human civilization has existed. These trees remind us that our individual lives, even our entire species' history, are brief moments in the long, slow story of Earth's living communities. But even bristlecone pines are youngsters compared to some plant colonies. The Pando aspen grove in Utah, a single organism connected by one root system, may be 8,000 to 80,000 years old, based on estimates of when the land it occupies emerged from glaciation. And in the Mediterranean, a seagrass called Posidonia oceanica has been found growing in meadows where genetic testing suggests some clones could be over 100,000 years old. Though dating such organisms remains challenging, these ancient clonal organisms have survived ice ages and dramatic climate shifts, demonstrating an endurance that makes our species seem ephemeral by comparison. Plants can also sense their environment in ways we're only beginning to understand. When researchers recorded the sound of caterpillars chewing on leaves and played these recordings to uninfested plants, the plants increased their production of defensive chemicals, even though no actual damage had occurred. This suggests plants can somehow hear, or at least sense vibrations, and distinguish threatening sounds from harmless ones. Plants also appear to communicate through chemical signals released into the air. When a tobacco plant is attacked by caterpillars, it releases volatile organic compounds that nearby plants can detect. These neighboring plants then preemptively activate their own defenses, even though they haven't been attacked yet. This early warning system allows plants in a community to prepare for threats before they arrive. Some plants have evolved remarkable memory systems despite lacking anything like a brain. The sensitive plant, Mimosa pudica, will fold its leaves when touched, a defense mechanism thought to startle herbivores or make the plant less appealing. Researchers repeatedly dropped these plants, which would close their leaves with each drop. After several repetitions, the plants stopped closing their leaves, apparently learning that the drop was harmless. More remarkably, weeks later, when the experiment was repeated, the plants still remembered and didn't close their leaves at the first drop. This habituation, learning to ignore repeated harmless stimuli, is a basic form of learning usually associated with animals possessing nervous systems. How plants accomplish this without neurons remains mysterious, but it demonstrates that intelligence and memory aren't necessarily tied to the specific structures we see in animal brains. The dodder vine, a parasitic plant, can make decisions. When given a choice between multiple host plants, it grows toward the one that will provide the most nutrients, apparently assessing plant quality before committing to parasitize it. The vine samples potential hosts chemically, detecting volatile compounds each plant releases, then makes a choice about which direction to grow. If the most nutritious plant is moved after the dodder begins growing toward it, the vine will change course, tracking its preferred target. This behavior requires the plant to sense its environment, remember what it sensed, integrate information over time, and make decisions that maximize its fitness, all without a brain or nervous system. The power of weather. Lightning is one of nature's most spectacular displays of raw energy, and its power is almost incomprehensible. A typical lightning bolt carries about 1 billion volts of electricity and reaches temperatures of around 30,000 degrees Celsius, approximately 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun. This extreme heat causes the air to expand so rapidly that it creates the thunder we hear, essentially a supersonic shockwave traveling through the atmosphere. Lightning forms when ice crystals in storm clouds collide, creating static electricity that builds up until the electrical difference between the cloud and the ground, or between different parts of the cloud, becomes so great that the air's insulation breaks down. The actual bolt we see is a return stroke, electricity flowing from the ground up to the cloud along the path of least resistance created by a nearly invisible leader stroke that descended milliseconds earlier. Lightning strikes Earth about 100 times every second, roughly 8 million times per day, transferring vast amounts of energy and actually creating useful nitrogen compounds that fall to the ground and fertilize soil. The idea that lightning never strikes the same place twice is completely false. The Empire State Building is struck about 25 times per year. Hurricanes, also called typhoons or tropical cyclones, depending on where they form, are among the most powerful storms on Earth. These massive spinning systems of clouds and thunderstorms form over warm ocean water, typically when sea surface temperatures exceed 26.5 degrees Celsius. Warm, moist air rises rapidly, creating an area of low pressure at the surface. More air rushes in to fill this void, which then also rises and warms, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. The Coriolis effect, caused by Earth's rotation, makes the storm system spin. In the northern hemisphere, hurricanes spin counterclockwise, while in the southern hemisphere, they spin clockwise. At the storm's center is the eye, a region of calm air and clear skies that can be 30 to 60 kilometers across. The eye wall surrounding it contains the strongest winds, which can exceed 250 kilometers per hour in the most intense storms. A major hurricane releases heat energy equivalent to a 10 megaton nuclear bomb, exploding every 20 minutes. Yet for all their power, hurricanes serve important functions. They transport heat from the tropics toward the poles, helping to regulate Earth's temperature, and they can break droughts by bringing substantial rainfall to dry regions. Tornadoes are nature's most violent windstorms, with the strongest reaching wind speeds over 300 kilometers per hour. They form when conditions are just right for a rotating column of air to descend from a thunderstorm to the ground. This typically requires warm, moist air near the surface, cooler, dry air above it, and wind shear, wind speed, or direction changing with altitude, which provides the initial rotation. As the thunderstorm's updraft intensifies, it can tighten and accelerate this rotation, like an ice skater spinning faster when they pull their arms in. The visible funnel cloud is actually water vapor condensing in the low-pressure core of the tornado. The actual wind field extends beyond what we can see. Tornado intensity is measured on the enhanced Fujita scale from EF0, causing minor damage, to EF5, with winds exceeding 200 miles per hour, capable of leveling well-built houses and hurling cars hundreds of meters. Fortunately, EF5 tornadoes are extremely rare. The United States experiences more tornadoes than any other country, averaging over 1,000 per year, because its geography allows cold air from Canada to collide with warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico, creating ideal conditions for severe thunderstorms. The aurora borealis in the northern hemisphere and aurora australis in the southern hemisphere create some of nature's most beautiful light shows. These shimmering curtains of green, pink, red, and purple light occur when charged particles from the sun, carried by solar wind, collide with gases in Earth's atmosphere. Our planet's magnetic field funnels these particles toward the poles, which is why auroras are typically visible only in far northern and southern latitudes. When the solar particles hit oxygen and nitrogen molecules in the atmosphere, they transfer energy that causes these molecules to glow. Oxygen at high altitudes produces red auroras, while oxygen at lower altitudes creates the more common green. Nitrogen produces blue or purple light. During particularly intense solar storms, auroras can be visible at much lower latitudes than usual. The aurora's dancing motion is caused by the fluctuating solar wind and changes in Earth's magnetic field. Indigenous peoples in Arctic regions have watched these lights for thousands of years, weaving them into myths and legends. Some believed they were spirits of the dead dancing in the sky, while others saw them as cosmic battles or messages from the gods. Now we understand the science, but the spectacle remains no less wondrous. Extreme heat waves are becoming more frequent and intense as the climate changes, with some regions now regularly experiencing temperatures over 40 degrees Celsius. Heat itself becomes dangerous when it overwhelms the human body's ability to cool itself through sweating. In humid conditions, sweat can't evaporate efficiently, making high heat even more dangerous. Heat waves kill more people annually than hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods combined, though their death tolls are often less visible. The 2003 European heatwave killed an estimated 70,000 people, while the 2010 Russian heatwave killed 55,000. Beyond direct health impacts, extreme heat stresses infrastructure, causes droughts that devastate agriculture, and increases wildfire risk. It also creates feedback loops, as urban areas retain heat in concrete and asphalt, creating heat islands that can be 5 to 7 degrees warmer than surrounding rural areas. Nighttime temperatures are rising faster than daytime temperatures, which is particularly concerning because people need cool nights to recover from heat stress during the day. Scientists predict that if current emissions trends continue, some regions of the planet could experience regular wet bulb temperatures, a combination of heat and humidity that exceed the limits of human survival, even in the shade with unlimited water. Floods are the most common natural disaster, affecting more people than any other type of weather event. They can result from many causes: heavy rainfall, rapid snowmelt, storm surge from hurricanes, or dam failures. River floods develop over days or weeks as rainfall in a watershed accumulates and flows downstream. Flash floods, by contrast, can occur within minutes as intense rainfall overwhelms local drainage. These are particularly dangerous because they strike with little warning and can generate tremendous force. 6 inches of rapidly flowing water can knock down an adult, and a foot of water can sweep away most vehicles. 90% of natural disasters in the United States involve flooding. Paradoxically, flooding can be both destructive and beneficial. The annual flooding of the Nile River in ancient Egypt deposited nutrient-rich silt across the floodplain, enabling agriculture in an otherwise arid region. Many ecosystems, from river deltas to wetlands, depend on regular flooding to function properly. However, human development in flood-prone areas, coupled with climate changes that intensify rainfall, has made flooding increasingly costly and dangerous. Drought, the absence of expected rainfall, can be even more devastating than floods, though its impacts unfold more slowly. When drought persists for months or years, it depletes soil moisture, lowers water tables, dries up rivers and lakes, and stresses all forms of life. Agricultural droughts reduce crop yields or cause complete crop failures, threatening food security. The Dust Bowl of the 1930s in the American Great Plains showed how severe drought, combined with poor farming practices, can render previously productive land uninhabitable. Topsoil, dried out and no longer held by plant roots, blew away in massive dust storms that darkened skies as far away as Washington, D.C. Hundreds of thousands of people were displaced. More recently, the 2011 Texas drought caused over $7 billion in agricultural losses, while the ongoing megadrought in the western United States, now in its 3rd decade, is the most severe in at least 1,200 years. Drought affects ecosystems too, weakening trees and making forests more susceptible to insect outbreaks and catastrophic wildfires. As temperatures rise with climate change, evaporation increases, and many regions are experiencing more frequent and severe droughts, even when total annual rainfall hasn't changed significantly. Tiny worlds. The soil beneath our feet contains more living organisms than all the visible animals on Earth combined. In a single handful of healthy soil, there might be more individual living creatures than there are people on the planet. These microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, archaea, protists, and microscopic animals form the foundation of terrestrial ecosystems. They break down dead organic matter, releasing nutrients that plants can absorb. They form symbiotic relationships with plant roots, helping them access water and minerals. Some bacteria can fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, converting it into forms that plants can use to build proteins. Without these invisible laborers, life as we know it couldn't exist. Dead leaves and fallen trees would pile up endlessly, nutrients would remain locked away, and plants would starve in soil rich with organic matter they couldn't access. The diversity of soil microbes is astonishing. A gram of soil can contain 10,000 different bacterial species, most of which have never been studied and many of which we don't even have names for yet. we're only beginning to understand the complexity of soil ecosystems and how human activities, from pesticide use to tillage practices, affect these critical communities. Bees are often called nature's tiny engineers, and with good reason. Their pollination services are essential for reproducing many crops and wild plants. It's estimated that 1 out of every 3 bites of food we eat depends on pollinators, primarily bees. Honeybees alone pollinate crops worth billions of dollars annually. But bees do more than just move pollen from flower to flower. Their foraging behavior, their preferences for certain flowers, and even their mistakes help maintain plant diversity in ecosystems. When a bee visits a flower, it picks up more pollen than it needs, and some of this pollen falls off at the next flower visited, enabling cross-pollination even between flowers of different species. This genetic mixing produces new variations that natural selection can act upon. Different bee species have different foraging strategies. Some are generalists, visiting many flower types, while others specialize in particular plant families. This diversity of approaches ensures that many different plants get pollinated. There are over 20,000 bee species worldwide, from tiny sweat bees, smaller than a grain of rice, to carpenter bees almost as large as your thumb. Most are solitary rather than social, and many are more efficient pollinators than honeybees for specific crops. The decline of bee populations in recent decades, driven by habitat loss, pesticide use, disease, and climate change, represents a serious threat to both agriculture and wild ecosystems. Ants, those ubiquitous insects we barely notice unless they invade our homes, are among the most successful animals on Earth. They've been estimated to make up around 20% of the total animal biomass on land, meaning that the combined weight of all ants roughly equals the combined weight of all humans. Ant colonies function as superorganisms, with individuals working together so efficiently that the colony itself can be thought of as a single entity. Different ants specialize in different tasks. Worker ants forage for food, soldier ants defend the colony, and the queen produces new individuals. Leafcutter ants don't eat the leaves they harvest. Instead, they chew them into mulch and use it to cultivate fungus gardens underground. The ants eat the fungus, and the fungus breaks down the leaves, creating a farming system that evolved over millions of years. Some ant species keep livestock, protecting aphids from predators in exchange for the honeydew aphids secrete. Others wage war on neighboring colonies, conducting raids to steal food or capture workers that they enslave. Army ants are nomadic, moving their entire colony regularly and overwhelming prey through sheer numbers. Fire ants can link their bodies together to form living rafts that float during floods, protecting the queen and larvae in the center. These tiny creatures demonstrate that intelligence and cooperation aren't limited to large-brained animals. Dung beetles, while perhaps not as charismatic as bees or butterflies, perform essential ecosystem services that often go unappreciated. They remove feces from the landscape, burying it underground where it fertilizes soil and prevents the accumulation of waste that would otherwise harbor disease-spreading flies. In Australia, when European cattle were introduced, the native dung beetles that had evolved with marsupial feces couldn't efficiently process cow dung. Cattle pastures became fouled with undecomposed manure, and flies multiplied dramatically. Australia had to import dung beetle species from Africa and Europe that specialized in cattle dung to solve the problem. Dung beetles locate fresh dung using their keen sense of smell, capable of detecting it from kilometers away. Many species roll dung into balls, sometimes much larger than their own bodies, and roll these balls away to bury them. Recent research discovered that dung beetles navigate using the Milky Way, becoming the first known insect to orient itself by the galaxy. When the sky is overcast or researchers blocked the beetles' view of the stars, they became disoriented and rolled their dung balls in circles. Under a clear, starry sky, they roll in perfectly straight lines away from the dung pile, using the light pattern of the Milky Way as a compass. Mosquitoes, despite being one of our least favorite insects, play important ecological roles. They serve as food for countless other animals, from fish to frogs to birds to dragonflies. In Arctic tundra, massive swarms of mosquitoes emerging in summer provide crucial protein for migratory birds, raising their chicks. Male mosquitoes don't bite at all. They feed on nectar and are actually pollinators for various plants. Only female mosquitoes consume blood, which they need for protein to develop their eggs. Most mosquito species don't bite humans, preferring birds, frogs, or other animals. Of the roughly 3,500 mosquito species, only a few hundred bite humans. That said, mosquitoes are the deadliest animals to humans, not through their bites directly, but through the diseases they transmit: malaria, dengue fever, yellow fever, Zika virus, and others. These diseases kill hundreds of thousands of people annually, making mosquitoes responsible for more human deaths than any other animal, including other humans. This highlights a central challenge in ecosystem management. Even pest species often serve important ecological functions, so controlling them without unintended consequences requires careful thought. Microscopic plankton in the ocean, despite their tiny size, have an outsized impact on global systems. Phytoplankton, microscopic plants drifting in sunlit surface waters, perform photosynthesis just like land plants. Collectively, they produce at least half of the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere, meaning every other breath you take comes from these tiny organisms. They also form the base of ocean food chains. Zooplankton, microscopic animals, eat the phytoplankton. Small fish eat zooplankton. Larger fish eat those, and so on up to whales and sharks. When plankton die, they sink, carrying carbon from the surface to the deep ocean, where it can remain sequestered for centuries, making plankton an important part of Earth's carbon cycle. The total biomass of ocean plankton is difficult to calculate, but estimates suggest there might be 200 times more mass of plankton in the ocean than mass of all humans. Yet these communities are sensitive to changes in temperature, ocean chemistry, and nutrient availability. As the ocean warms, and becomes more acidic from absorbing atmospheric carbon dioxide. Some plankton populations are shifting, declining, or relocating to cooler waters. Changes in plankton populations ripple through entire ecosystems and can affect oxygen production, carbon sequestration, and the fish populations that billions of people depend on for protein. Extreme environments. The Arctic and Antarctic represent two of Earth's most extreme environments, yet life persists in both. Arctic temperatures can plunge to -50 degrees Celsius or colder, while Antarctic temperatures have been recorded as low as -90 degrees. The Antarctic is actually a frozen desert, receiving less precipitation annually than the Sahara, though what little moisture does fall accumulates as ice over millennia. Despite these harsh conditions, organisms have evolved remarkable adaptations. Antarctic fish produce antifreeze proteins in their blood that prevent ice crystals from forming inside their bodies. These proteins bind to tiny ice crystals, preventing them from growing large enough to damage cells. Emperor penguins, the only animals that breed on Antarctic sea ice during winter, huddle together in massive groups to conserve warmth, with the individuals taking turns on the exposed edges of the huddle. Polar bears in the Arctic have evolved black skin beneath their white fur. Black skin absorbs more heat from sunlight, while the transparent fur traps air for insulation. Arctic ground squirrels can lower their body temperature below freezing during hibernation, surviving in a state close to suspended animation for 8 months at a time. Bacteria have been found living in Antarctic ice that's been frozen for millions of years, demonstrating life's remarkable ability to endure. Wood frogs in North America have evolved perhaps the most remarkable freezing tolerance. As winter approaches, these small amphibians burrow into leaf litter and allow themselves to freeze solid. Ice forms in their body cavity and between muscle fibers, but not inside cells, which would be fatal. Their livers produce massive amounts of glucose that acts as antifreeze inside cells, preventing ice crystal formation. The frog's heart stops beating, it stops breathing, and up to 70% of its body water freezes solid. In spring, it thaws from the inside out, its heart restarting and its vital functions resuming as if nothing happened. This ability to survive being frozen solid for months represents one of the most remarkable physiological adaptations in the animal kingdom. The Sahara, though typically associated with barren sand dunes, actually hosts surprising biodiversity. Fennec foxes, the smallest of all fox species, have enormous ears that help dissipate heat and acute hearing that allows them to locate prey underground. They can go indefinitely without drinking water, getting all the moisture they need from their food. Deathstalker scorpions can survive a whole year without eating, lowering their metabolic rate to conserve energy. Desert locusts, normally solitary, can transform into a swarming phase when conditions are right, forming groups of billions that can travel over 100 kilometers per day and devastate crops. This transformation involves changes not just in behavior, but in color, body shape, and metabolism, all triggered by crowding and resource availability. Perhaps most impressive are the tardigrades, microscopic animals nicknamed water bears or moss piglets that can survive conditions that would kill virtually anything else. They've been found everywhere from mountaintops to deep ocean trenches, from hot springs to Antarctic ice. When conditions become unfavorable, tardigrades enter a state called cryptobiosis, essentially shutting down all metabolic processes. In this state, they can survive temperatures from near absolute zero to over 150 degrees Celsius, pressure 6 times greater than the deepest ocean trench, radiation levels hundreds of times higher than what would kill a human, and even the vacuum of space. In experiments, tardigrades were sent to the International Space Station and exposed to the space environment, surviving conditions that would be instantly fatal to almost any other form of life. They can remain in cryptobiosis for years, even decades, reviving within hours when water becomes available again. These tiny creatures, typically less than a millimeter long, demonstrate that the limits of life are far broader than we once imagined. Deserts, often thought of as lifeless, teem with specialized organisms. The Sahara, world's largest hot desert, receives less than 3 inches of rain per year in most areas, and temperatures regularly exceed 50 degrees Celsius in summer. Yet fennec foxes thrive here, staying cool with enormous ears that radiate heat and foraging at night. Camels can survive losing 25% of their body weight in water, a level of dehydration that would kill most mammals, and can rehydrate by drinking over 40 gallons of water in one session. Desert plants like the saguaro cactus have roots that spread wide rather than deep, quickly absorbing rare rainfall before it evaporates. Some plants have evolved even more extreme strategies. The resurrection plant can lose 95% of its water, appearing completely dead for years, then spring back to life within hours when water becomes available. Desert animals often avoid the heat entirely. Many are nocturnal, and some, like certain frogs, spend most of their lives underground, only emerging after rare rains to feed and breed. Some desert beetles in the Namib Desert collect water by standing on dunes early in the morning, allowing fog to condense on their backs and trickle down into their mouths. Every organism in the desert is shaped by the scarcity of water and the extremes of temperature, demonstrating evolution's power to solve even the most challenging problems. Hot springs and hydrothermal vents host some of Earth's most extreme organisms. Thermophiles, organisms that thrive in high temperatures, have been found living in water over 100 degrees Celsius. One species of bacteria, strain 121, can survive and reproduce at 121 degrees Celsius, the temperature used to sterilize medical equipment. These organisms have fundamentally different biochemistry than most life, with proteins and cell membranes that remain stable at temperatures that would cook normal cells. The discovery of these extremophiles, as they're collectively called, has expanded our understanding of life's possibilities and provided insights relevant to understanding where life might exist on other planets. If life can thrive at these extreme temperatures on Earth, perhaps it could survive in the hot springs of Mars or in the ice-covered oceans of Jupiter's moon, Europa. Studying extremophiles has practical applications too. The enzymes from thermophilic bacteria are now used in PCR, the polymerase chain reaction technique essential to DNA sequencing and genetic research, because unlike normal enzymes, they don't break down at the high temperatures needed for the process. Cave ecosystems exist in complete darkness, creating unique evolutionary pressures. Animals that have spent millions of years evolving in caves often lose their eyes and pigmentation, since both require energy to maintain, but provide no benefit in total darkness. Cave fish have no functional eyes, just vestigial eye structures covered by skin, but they've evolved enhanced lateral line systems that detect water movements with incredible sensitivity, allowing them to navigate and hunt in the dark. Cave ecosystems have low biodiversity, but high rates of endemism. Many cave species are found nowhere else because caves are isolated from each other, preventing gene flow between populations. Food is scarce in caves since photosynthesis is impossible, so most cave ecosystems depend on nutrients washing in from outside or brought in by bats. Bat guano, the accumulated droppings from bat colonies, becomes the foundation of cave food chains, supporting insects and other invertebrates, which in turn feed specialized predators. Some caves harbor extremophiles that derive energy from chemical reactions involving minerals in the rock, independent of any outside input. The cave system in Romania called Moval Cave has been sealed off from the surface for over 5 million years and has evolved its own complete ecosystem based on chemosynthetic bacteria containing dozens of species found nowhere else on Earth. Interconnected systems, biodiversity, the variety of life on Earth is not just beautiful, it's essential for the functioning of ecosystems. Diverse ecosystems are more stable and resilient than simple ones. When an ecosystem contains many species, each playing slightly different roles and responding differently to environmental stresses, the system can better withstand disturbances. If one species declines due to disease, drought, or other factors, other species can partially compensate, maintaining ecosystem functions like nutrient cycling, pollination, and primary production. This redundancy is crucial. The Irish potato famine of the 1840s showed what can happen when biodiversity is lost. Irish agriculture had become dependent on a single variety of potato, and when a disease called potato blight arrived, it devastated the entire crop because there was no genetic diversity to provide resistance. 1 million people died and another million emigrated. Contrast this with the Andes Mountains, where potatoes originated. Indigenous farmers there cultivate hundreds of potato varieties, ensuring that even if disease strikes, some varieties will resist it. This same principle applies to natural ecosystems. Rainforests with thousands of tree species are more resilient than monoculture tree plantations. Coral reefs with high fish diversity are better able to withstand bleaching events and overfishing than species. Poor reefs. Food webs, the interconnected feeding relationships in ecosystems, are far more complex than simple food chains. Every organism has multiple predators, multiple prey species, and multiple competitors, creating a web of interactions that can have surprising, indirect effects. When wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park after a 70-year absence, the ecosystem transformed. The wolves hunted elk, but that wasn't the whole story. Elk, no longer able to graze in open areas without risk, changed their behavior, avoiding vulnerable spots like riverbanks. This allowed willows and aspens to regrow along streams. The trees stabilized riverbanks, reducing erosion. They also provided habitat for songbirds, which increased in diversity and abundance. Beavers, which depend on willows for food and building material, returned after nearly disappearing. Beaver dams created ponds that provided habitat for fish, amphibians, and waterfowl. Even the rivers themselves changed course as the vegetation stabilized banks and beaver dams created new channels. One species, the wolf, cascaded through the ecosystem, affecting plants, animals, even the physical geography. This is called a trophic cascade, and it demonstrates how removing or adding a species at one level of the food web can reorganize the entire system. These indirect effects mean that protecting biodiversity isn't just about saving individual species, but about maintaining the relationships between species that allow ecosystems to function. Ecosystem services, the benefits humans derive from nature, are often invisible until they're lost. Wetlands filter water, removing pollutants and excess nutrients. A single acre of wetland can store up to 1.5 million gallons of floodwater, making them nature's sponges that reduce flooding downstream. Forests prevent soil erosion, their roots holding hillsides in place, and their canopies breaking the force of rain before it hits the ground. When forests are cleared from steep slopes, erosion accelerates dramatically, sending sediment into rivers that damages fish habitat and water quality. Mangrove forests along tropical coastlines protect against storm surge, their tangled roots breaking wave energy. When the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami struck, communities protected by intact mangrove forests suffered less damage and fewer casualties than those where mangroves had been cleared for shrimp farms. These services have immense economic value. One study estimated that if we had to replace insect pollination services with hand pollination, it would cost over $200 billion annually. Wetland water filtration services in the United States alone have been valued at over $3 billion per year. Yet, because these services are free, we often take them for granted until they're gone. Then we must pay for expensive technological replacements that often work less effectively than the natural systems they replaced. Symbiotic relationships, close interactions between different species, structure, many ecosystems. Mutualism, where both species benefit, is common. Lichens, those flat growths on rocks and tree bark, are actually partnerships between fungi and algae or cyanobacteria. The photosynthetic partner produces sugars, while the fungus provides structure and protection. Neither can survive alone. Coral reefs, as mentioned earlier, depend on the symbiosis between coral animals and zooxanthellae algae. Flowering plants and their pollinators represent one of the most important mutualisms on Earth. affecting ecosystem structure and agricultural productivity. But not all symbiotic relationships are beneficial to both parties. Parasitism, where one species benefits at the other's expense, is equally important ecologically. Parasites can regulate host populations, preventing any one species from dominating an ecosystem. Some parasites even manipulate their host's behavior to complete their life cycles. The parasitic hairworm infects grasshoppers and crickets growing inside them, then produces chemicals that compel the insect to jump into water, where the worm emerges to mate. Toxoplasma gondii, a parasitic protist that reproduces in cats, infects rodents and makes them less fearful of cat odors, increasing the likelihood they'll be caught and eaten, allowing the parasite to return to its primary host. These manipulations show how deeply interconnected life is, with species literally changing each other's biology and behavior in the struggle for survival and reproduction. Keystone species, despite their relatively low abundance, have disproportionate effects on their ecosystems. The concept comes from architecture. Remove the keystone from an arch, and the whole structure collapses. Remove a keystone species from an ecosystem and it fundamentally changes, often losing biodiversity and ecosystem functions. Sea otters in Pacific kelp forests are classic keystones. Otters eat sea urchins, which eat kelp. Where otters are present, they control urchin populations, allowing kelp forests to thrive. These forests support countless species, from fish to seabirds to other marine mammals. Where otters have been hunted to extinction or near extinction, urchin populations explode, overgrazing the kelp and creating what's called an urchin barren, a rocky seafloor devoid of forest. Kelp forests sequester large amounts of carbon, so otters, by protecting kelp, also help mitigate climate change. Other keystone species include elephants, whose feeding and migration patterns maintain savanna grasslands, preventing them from becoming forests. Prairie dogs, whose burrow systems provide shelter for hundreds of other species and whose grazing influences plant community composition. Flying foxes, large fruit bats that pollinate and disperse seeds for hundreds of plant species across Old World tropics. Identifying and protecting keystone species is a conservation strategy that can preserve entire ecosystems by maintaining their key structural elements. The concept of ecosystem engineers extends beyond individual keystone species to describe organisms that physically modify their environment in ways that create or destroy habitats. Humans are perhaps the ultimate ecosystem engineers, capable of transforming landscapes on continental scales. But many other species play similar roles on smaller scales. Termites in tropical savannas build mounds that can be several meters tall and house millions of individuals. These structures create microhabitats with different temperatures, humidity levels, and nutrient concentrations than the surrounding environment. Even after termites abandon a mound, it remains as a distinct feature in the landscape for years, influencing where plants grow and how water flows. In temperate forests, fallen logs provide crucial habitat for countless species, from fungi and insects to salamanders and small mammals. As these logs decay over decades, they release nutrients slowly and create moisture gradients that structure plant communities. Dead-standing trees, called snags, provide nesting sites for woodpeckers and other cavity-nesting birds. Each stage of decay supports different communities, so forests need logs and snags in all stages of decomposition to maintain full biodiversity. Mycorrhizal networks, those fungal webs connecting plant roots, go even deeper than we've discussed. Recent research suggests these networks might allow plants to recognize kin, communicate about threats, and even alter their competitive behavior based on who they're connected to. Mother trees, the oldest and largest in a forest, have been shown to send excess carbon to their offspring through these networks, recognizing and nurturing their own seedlings even when they're growing among unrelated plants. Trees under attack by insects release chemical signals through mycorrhizal networks that trigger defensive responses in connected trees. The fungi benefit by receiving sugars from the trees while providing the trees with minerals and water their roots can't reach. But the relationship is more complex than simple exchange. Some plants cheat, taking more than they give. Some fungi connect trees of different species, facilitating resource sharing across the forest community. And some trees maintain connections with dozens of different fungal species simultaneously, diversifying their partnerships. These networks blur the lines between individual organisms and communities, suggesting that perhaps we should think of forests not as collections of trees, but as single interconnected organisms. The loss of biodiversity has consequences we're only beginning to understand. When local populations of species go extinct, they take with them unique genetic variations that might have been crucial for adapting to future environmental changes. Even if a species survives elsewhere, the loss of local populations reduces the species' genetic diversity and can disrupt ecosystem functions. Many species consist of distinct populations adapted to local conditions, essentially representing different solutions to the challenges posed by the environment. Losing these populations reduces nature's portfolio of tested strategies for survival. Some scientists argue we're entering a sixth mass extinction, with current extinction rates perhaps 1,000 times higher than the background rate seen in the fossil record. Unlike previous mass extinctions caused by asteroids, volcanoes, or natural climate shifts, this one is driven by human activities, habitat destruction, overexploitation, pollution, introduction of invasive species, and climate change. The consequences extend beyond the species we lose. Each extinction can trigger cascading effects through food webs and ecosystem processes, potentially leading to additional extinctions and ecosystem collapses. Yet, the situation isn't hopeless. When we protect habitat, control invasive species, reduce pollution, and allow populations to recover, ecosystems have demonstrated remarkable resilience. The question is whether we'll act quickly enough and on a large enough scale to prevent catastrophic losses. Nature's engineers. Beavers are often called ecosystem engineers because they physically modify their environment in ways that create habitat for many other species. When beavers build dams, they create ponds that transform the landscape. These ponds become habitat for fish, frogs, turtles, waterfowl, and aquatic insects that couldn't live in the original stream. The standing water raises the water table, creating wetlands around the pond's edges that support different plant communities. Dead trees flooded by the rising water provide perches for birds and nesting sites for cavity-dwelling species. The ponds also trap sediment, improving water quality downstream, and store water during wet periods, releasing it slowly during dry periods, which helps maintain stream flow during droughts. Beaver ponds act as fire breaks in forested areas, their saturated surroundings resisting the spread of wildfires. Multiple studies have found that streams with active beaver populations support greater biodiversity and more complex ecosystem structure than similar streams without beavers. Yet beavers were nearly extinct in many areas by the early 20th century due to overhunting for their fur. Their return to many regions has been accompanied by ecosystem recovery, streams becoming more complex, wildlife returning, and water quality improving. Coral reefs, built by tiny coral polyps over thousands of years, support an extraordinary proportion of ocean biodiversities, despite covering less than 1% of the seafloor. Reefs provide shelter and food for about 25% of all marine fish species, along with countless invertebrates. The complex three-dimensional structure of reefs creates countless niches, crevices, caves, and overhangs where species can hide from predators, lay eggs, and hunt. Many commercially important fish species depend on reefs for at least part of their life cycles, often spending their juvenile stages in reef environments before moving to open ocean. Reefs also protect coastlines, breaking wave energy before it reaches shore, which prevents erosion and reduces storm damage. Countries with extensive reef systems receive significant income from reef-related tourism and fishing. Yet reefs are highly vulnerable to human impacts. Ocean warming causes coral bleaching. Nutrient pollution from agriculture promotes algae growth that smothers corals. And ocean acidification makes it harder for corals to build their calcium carbonate skeletons. It's estimated that 30% of reefs have been severely damaged, and another 60% are under threat. Protecting coral reefs requires addressing both local impacts like overfishing and pollution, and global impacts like climate change. Soil formation is one of nature's slowest processes, yet one of its most important. Soil begins with rock. Over hundreds or thousands of years, physical weathering, the expansion of water as it freezes in cracks, the grinding of glaciers, the prying action of plant roots breaks rock into smaller pieces. Chemical weathering, as slightly acidic water dissolves minerals, further breaks down the material. Pioneer organisms, lichens that can grow directly on rock surfaces, begin to accumulate a thin layer of organic matter. This allows mosses and small plants to establish, which further break down rock and add more organic matter. Dead plants and animals, processed by decomposers, contribute nutrients. Slowly, very slowly, a few centimeters per century in many places, rock becomes soil. But soil is not just broken down rock mixed with organic matter. It's a living ecosystem containing billions of organisms that create its structure and fertility. Fungal hyphae bind soil particles together. Plant roots create channels that allow water and air to penetrate. Worms and insects mix different soil layers. The process is so slow that topsoil, the richest layer that plants depend on, is essentially a non-renewable resource on human timescales. Yet agricultural practices that cause erosion can lose centuries' worth of soil formation in a single generation. Where soil is lost, the land becomes unable to support plant growth, leading to desertification and ecosystem collapse. Termites, often considered pests when they damage wooden structures, are actually crucial ecosystem engineers in many tropical and subtropical regions. Termite mounds, some reaching heights of several meters, are architectural marvels with sophisticated ventilation systems that maintain stable temperature and humidity inside. These mounds house millions of individuals working together in a highly organized colony. Like leafcutter ants, many termite species cultivate fungus gardens inside their mounds, using chewed plant material as substrate. The fungus breaks down cellulose that the termites can't digest themselves, and the termites then eat the fungus. This agriculture evolved independently in termites and ants, showing that complex food cultivation is a viable strategy for insect societies. Termite activity has major effects on ecosystems. By consuming and breaking down dead wood and plant material, they speed nutrient recycling. Their tunneling aerates soil and increases water infiltration. In savannas, termite mounds create nutrient hotspots where different plant communities establish. These mounds, even after being abandoned, remain visible in the landscape for decades. Their compacted soil and accumulated nutrients making them distinct from surrounding areas. Some termite species are pests, but in natural ecosystems, they're essential recyclers, without which dead plant material would accumulate and decompose much more slowly. The night-sky connection. Many animals navigate using celestial cues, a skill we're only beginning to understand. Dung beetles, as mentioned earlier, use the Milky Way. Birds migrating at night use the stars. And experiments where researchers altered star patterns in planetariums showed that birds adjust their migration direction based on the artificial sky. Some birds also use the sun's position during the day, compensating for its movement across the sky by using an internal clock to maintain their bearing. Sea turtles, hatching on beaches at night, orient themselves to the ocean by following the brightest horizon, which over evolutionary time was always the star-lit ocean rather than the darker land. Unfortunately, artificial lights now confuse hatchlings, drawing them toward bright beachfront development rather than toward the sea, contributing to high mortality. Monarch butterflies use the sun's position for orientation during their migration, but because their journey takes several weeks and the sun's apparent position changes with the seasons, they must constantly adjust their flight angle relative to the sun. They do this using a time-compensated sun compass, similar to what birds use, integrating information from both their circadian clock and their visual system. This requires that different parts of their nervous system communicate continuously, a remarkable feat for an animal with a brain smaller than a pinhead. Recent research suggests monarch butterflies may also sense Earth's magnetic field, providing a backup navigation system. The moon's gravitational pull creates tides, the regular rise and fall of sea levels that structure coastal ecosystems. The moon's gravity pulls water toward it, creating a bulge in the ocean on the side of Earth facing the moon. Interestingly, there's also a bulge on the opposite side because the solid Earth is pulled toward the moon more than the water on the far side, leaving that water behind. As Earth rotates through these bulges, most coastlines experience 2 high tides and 2 low tides per day. The sun's gravity also affects tides, though less strongly, because while the sun is much more massive, it's also much farther away. When the sun and moon align during new and full moons, their gravitational effects combine, creating spring tides with higher highs and lower lows. When they're perpendicular to each other during quarter moons, their effects partly cancel, creating neap tides with smaller tidal ranges. Tides profoundly influence coastal life. Intertidal zones, areas covered by water at high tide but exposed at low tide, host specialized organisms that must survive both aquatic and terrestrial conditions. Barnacles and mussels close their shells during low tide, retaining moisture until the water returns. Some fish time their spawning with tidal cycles, while crabs and many other animals synchronize their activity patterns with tides. Even some marine worms time their reproductive cycles to specific moon phases, ensuring their larvae are released at optimal times. Seasonal changes, driven by Earth's tilt on its axis, create rhythms that organize ecosystems. In temperate and polar regions, the dramatic differences between summer and winter drive annual cycles of growth, reproduction, migration, and dormancy. Trees in deciduous forests shed their leaves and fall, conserving energy and water during the cold, dark winter. They time this using photoperiod, the length of daylight, as their cue, ensuring they aren't fooled by an unseasonably warm November into keeping their leaves too long. Perennial plants die back to their roots in fall, storing energy underground to fuel rapid regrowth in spring. Animals respond to seasonal changes in various ways. Some migrate, traveling to where conditions are more favorable. Others hibernate, lowering their body temperature and metabolic rate to save energy during the lean winter months. Still others remain active but change their diet and behavior. Predators' fur may change color, white in winter for camouflage in snow, brown in summer to blend with vegetation. Reproductive cycles are often timed so that births occur when food is abundant, typically spring or early summer. Birds that overwinter in the tropics begin their migration back to northern breeding grounds, triggered by changing day length, a cue that's reliable even though local temperatures and weather may vary. These seasonal rhythms have been refined over millions of years, making organisms exquisitely adapted to the annual cycles of their environments. Circadian rhythms, approximately 24-hour biological cycles govern the daily activities of almost all organisms. These internal clocks persist even in the absence of environmental cues. Animals kept in constant darkness or constant light still maintain roughly 24-hour cycles of activity and rest, though they may drift slightly without external cues to synchronize them. In nature, light is the primary Zeitgeber, time giver, that keeps circadian clocks synchronized with the actual day-night cycle. Circadian rhythms regulate sleep-wake cycles, feeding behavior, hormone release, body temperature, and many other physiological processes. The molecular machinery of circadian clocks, involving genes that turn on and off in feedback loops over the course of 24 hours, is remarkably similar across species, from fruit flies to humans, suggesting this mechanism evolved early and was so useful that it was conserved over hundreds of millions of years of evolution. Plants have circadian rhythms too, leaves moving to track the sun during the day and assuming different positions at night. Flowers time their opening and scent production to when their pollinators are active, and they can anticipate dawn, beginning to prepare for photosynthesis before the sun actually rises. Disruption of circadian rhythms, which happens with jet lag, shift work, or excessive artificial light at night, has negative health effects across many species, including humans. Even plants deep in the forest, where sunlight barely penetrates, maintain circadian rhythms synchronized to the day-night cycle. They do this by detecting the quality of light that filters through the canopy, which changes subtly throughout the day, even when total light intensity remains low. This allows them to coordinate their photosynthetic machinery, opening stomata and activating chloroplasts at the times when even small amounts of available light can be captured most efficiently. The universality of circadian rhythms across all domains of life, from bacteria to redwoods to humans, suggests that the rotation of Earth and the resulting day-night cycle has been one of the most important environmental factors shaping the evolution of life. Closing reflection. And now, as the night deepens around you and your mind drifts between waking and sleep, let's pause and gather all these threads together. From the forests breathing through their fungal networks to the deep-sea creatures crafting light in endless darkness, from the tiniest microbes transforming soil to the grand patterns of hurricanes and migrations written across the sky. Nature is not a collection of separate things, but a living whole, an intricate web where everything touches everything else. The bee visiting a flower is part of a story that includes the flower's evolution, the soil feeding its roots, the fungi partnering with those roots, the bacteria in the soil, the weather bringing rain, the sun providing energy, and yes, even you, breathing oxygen that organisms in the soil, ocean, and forest continuously renew. We are not separate from these systems. The atoms in your body were forged in ancient stars that exploded billions of years ago. The water you drink has cycled through clouds and rivers, through the bodies of countless organisms, perhaps even dinosaur bodies, over millions of years. The food you eat is built from sunlight, captured by plants, and transformed through their remarkable chemistry into sugars and proteins. The air you breathe this very moment contains oxygen molecules that were split from water by a plant somewhere, maybe a tree in your neighborhood, maybe phytoplankton in a distant ocean within the last few weeks. We are participants in these great cycles, part of nature, even when we forget it, even when we live in cities far from visible wilderness. Understanding nature, really understanding it, changes how we see our place in the world. These 100 facts are not isolated curiosities, but windows into deeper truths about how life works, how it persists, how it evolves and adapts and creates beauty even in the harshest conditions. Nature is not fragile in the sense of being easily destroyed. Life has survived 5 mass extinctions and countless other catastrophes over its billion-year history. But individual ecosystems, particular species, even entire biomes can be irreversibly altered by human activities happening at speeds evolution cannot match. The knowledge we've explored tonight carries responsibility. When we understand how trees talk through fungal networks, we think differently about clear-cutting forests. When we learn how bees and crops depend on each other, we reconsider pesticide use. When we see how removing one predator can cascade through an entire ecosystem, we approach conservation more thoughtfully. But beyond responsibility, there's wonder. The natural world is far stranger, more complex, more creative than most of us imagine. Mantis shrimp, seeing colors we can't perceive, trees older than civilizations, fish creating light without heat, beavers engineering ecosystems, soils teeming with more life than we can count. These facts aren't just information to memorize, they're invitations to pay attention, to look more closely at the world around you. That patch of dirt in your garden contains billions of organisms recycling nutrients. That bird outside your window is a living dinosaur whose ancestors survived the asteroid that killed everything larger than a house cat. The storm you see on the horizon contains energies measured in megatons. Even the most ordinary natural phenomena, viewed with knowledge and attention, become extraordinary. So perhaps tonight, as you drift towards sleep, let these facts settle gently in your mind. Let them reshape how you see the morning light filtering through trees, the insects visiting flowers, the weather moving across the sky. Let them remind you that you live in a world far more alive, more interconnected, more magnificent than we usually notice in our daily hurry. And tomorrow, maybe look a little longer at the natural world around you, knowing that beneath the surface of everything, stories are unfolding that connect across species, across continents, across millions of years of evolution. If these explorations have helped you unwind tonight, if they've given you a quiet place to rest your thoughts or sparked some curiosity about the natural world, consider liking this video and subscribing to Whispered Knowledge. It helps others find their way to these peaceful, curious journeys through science and nature. One thoughtful person at a time, we build a community of people who find comfort and wonder in learning, who fall asleep not to emptiness, but to the gentle filling of their minds with the world's quiet marvels. I hope you sleep deeply tonight, with dreams of forests and oceans, of storms and starlight, of all the countless lives sharing this planet with us. Good night.